A big question. You're talking about entities, negative energies, intrusive energies. Yes, demons. They have many words to describe these. And you're talking about the origin, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the majority origin, the origin of most of these. By no means all. There are some big exceptions of what I'm going to talk about, but your general run-of-the-mill entity is formed from the following experience. We've actually created a huge problem for ourselves on this planet, human beings, and what we've done is we've deforested a huge amount of the planet. So the number of trees present on the earth is far less than it used to be. That's created terrible problems, not just with things like carbon dioxide oxygen balance, but with entities. Yes, that's right, because there's a natural process which takes place if there are enough trees around. When a person dies, the person's spiritual remains, if there are enough trees around, get drawn towards the trees, and the trees naturally process the person's spiritual remains, and the result of that is everything works the way it should do and there are no problems. Well, there's not a single country in the world that has not been deforested, so this is a worldwide problem. Because of the lack of trees, this is what now happens. When a person dies, unfortunately, what happens is that the person starts to decompose, not just physically their body, but also spiritually. Their essence starts to decompose into different parts. And because there are not enough trees to process them, what happens, these parts literally begin to take on a life of their own. And because they have the ability to do this, it means that they can actually transform into something quite unpleasant. So let me explain. When a person dies, apart from the physical body, there's another part of them which is called the energy body or the etheric. Now the etheric body naturally starts to break down into small packets. At the same time as this is going on, there's another part of the person which starts to break down, and that's the astral remains. So the astral body starts to break down into pieces. Now what happens is, if a piece of etheric body and a piece of astral body that have broken off from the disintegrating spiritual being, if they get together, what they can then do is they can form an entity. And this is the way that it works. The little bit of etheric energy on its own, without the bit of astral, will not survive. The little bit of astral energy on its own, without the etheric, will not survive. Now let me explain a bit more about the astral energy. Supposing you have a person who had a life where they really enjoyed a drink of alcohol, big drinker, loved it. When they died, the astral body of that person, when it starts to break down, will break down into fragments, and some of those fragments, quite a lot of them, are going to be fragments which have got a desire for a drink of alcohol. Now if one of those fragments can get together with a bit of the etheric energy from that person, they will then form what's called an entity. And guess what? That entity will be attracted to places where people consume alcohol. Yes, you've guessed it, a pub. Pubs are natural repositories of many, many discarnate entities or energies which are desiring a drink. So when someone goes to a pub to have a drink, they actually are having to pass through a cloud of these things. And you can imagine, if you start to think about what I'm saying, where this can go. No wonder there are so many alcoholics in this country, because there's a lot of pubs, there's a lot of discarnate energies hanging around the pubs which have got the desire for the drink. So if they find someone who really likes to drink, what are they going to do? Well, I should explain. Someone who drinks a lot of alcohol, what they've done to themselves is they've basically weakened their energy field. So these entities have got an easy access point. They can get in there, and once they get in, it's wonderful, because the desire for alcohol is satisfied, because the person then goes in the pub, starts having loads of drinks, that entity is satisfied. And this is how you turn a normal social drinker into a full-blown alcoholic. They are basically possessed by many, many entities which have been created in this manner. You've got people who commit terrible crimes. In the day's newspapers today, a man killed many, many people. A taxi driver, a perfectly decent guy, he's gone nuts, went on a rampage, had an argument, killed loads of people, injured many more. Why? I'll tell you why. Because he's infested with entities. the entities he was infested with didn't want him to drink alcohol, they didn't want him to overeat, they wanted him to go out killing and hurting. And he would have had those feelings in his system for years, maybe decades, before he finally exploded. There's the classic case of the man who picked up his 2.5-year-old son and dropped him from a balcony. His wife was watching him when he did this. She saw something funny happen to him. She saw his eyes glaze over. When he was interviewed by the police afterwards, he said, "I don't know what came over me." Ask a shaman, they know what came over him. An entity came over him, that's what came over him. And that voices that had been whispering in his head for all those years became so strong, he suddenly found himself obeying them. So let's go into a bit more detail. Ways you can get infested with entities are as follows. Having a really strong desire for alcohol and being a really regular pub goer, someone who regularly goes to the cinema, somebody who is actually giving birth to a baby, a person who is in the act of being born, someone who's having an operation in hospital. I've covered the biggest source of what I would call mundane entity infestation. Then let's deal with the less mundane one, which does take up a small percentage, people who have actually been attacked by black magicians. These are the primary sources of entity infestation. People who've been cursed by magicians, witches, whatever word you want to call them, people who are working for the dark. These are the ways that people can get entity infestation. So once the entities are in there, what they do first of all is they don't appear to have any effect at all. Because actually what they are doing is they're feeding off the person's energy. And at first they've chosen a nice, healthy, energetic person. And everything goes fine. But it's after time goes by that you start to get the problem. So the occasional social drinker, no problem. 20 years down the road, he's not an occasional social drinker anymore, is he? He's having a drink every single night without fail. Yeah, he's not a social drinker, he's an alcoholic. He doesn't think he is. He would swear blind he's nothing of the kind. But that's what he's become. Well, by this point, the entities have been feeding on that person's energy for so many years that the person's energy system starts to break down. And that's when they start to show symptoms of full-blown alcoholism. It's when their life starts to fall to pieces. And this is a general principle with entities. You can get an entity infestation at birth, as a baby. You might go 20, 30, even 40 years before it really starts to show itself. Or you could be incredibly unlucky and start to show symptoms after 10 years. But you won't generally show symptoms straight away. It takes time. The symptoms of entity infestation are really simple and obvious. You start to lose energy. You start to find that things you used to be able to do in the past, you just can't do anymore. That hill you used to sprint up, I can scarcely even walk up it. That's what you tend to find. So people with energy infestation, they tend to get weaker and weaker. They also show signs of not having any willpower. Another form could be chronic overeating. Supposing a person died in a state of great hunger, that little astral fragment would have a great desire for food. If it was fortunate enough to get together with a piece of etheric energy and get inside a human being that liked to eat rather a lot, next thing you know, you've got someone with serious obesity, having to have their jaws wired up or having operations to remove part of their guts. Yes, this is the sort of thing we're talking about. There are so many serious chronic conditions which are caused by entity infestations in all societies, but especially Western society. Very, very common. And the ironic thing is it can be treated so simply. All you need to do is find a good, well-qualified shaman and get them to remove them for you. Then you want to make sure they do something very important, is to seal you so that you're protected from any further infestation. And the work that I do involves applying chakra seals to the person's energy centres, which means that no more can entities enter them. I kid you not, the amount of suffering caused by entities on our planet is incalculable. And it's ironic that Western society has nothing to offer, apart from a few rather dodgy practices which I've come across. The best thing is to see a shaman. They're very skilled and proficient at this sort of work, and you literally can feel like a new human being when you're free of such creatures, and they are only grateful to be allowed to move on.